First of all, I'm honored to be here. I met Bruce for the first time. Bruce, I'm really struck with your heart and also your mind and also the fact that you outreach with a hand. Eric, thanks for getting me here. You got to understand, I met Eric. I remember Eric right now. I met Eric in Eden Prairie Public Schools. In 2002, the great Superintendent Melissa Krull asked me to do a keynote. And I said, I'm going to do that keynote, but I'm only going to do it on a pro bono basis, which I'm doing today also. I got up here from Connecticut, outside New York City, to be with you guys. And the audience reminds me of those Saturday classes that I used to give at Columbia University, where people it would be very small in the beginning and would start to grow and expand as the time went by. I did not sleep well last night because the graduating students were up until around 3, 4 o'clock and having a deserved good time celebrating their graduation. It reminded me, and I was telling David, that it reminded me of the time that I graduated from college and I was at City University of New York, and I must have partied till around 4:30. And there was a police officer that ran by, was driving by, and he yelled out of his car, he said, "Get a job!" All right, I got a job. I got many jobs. I think the topic that I've been asked to talk about today is so important, and that's why I'm here. Just make sure, full disclosure, making sure that no one does not know, when I was born, my birth certificate said Negro. I then became colored. I then was black. I had a lot of other words directed at me when I was growing up in a little town called Peekskill, New York. It started with the N word. Always getting into fights. Peekskill, New York. Does anyone know Peekskill, New York? All right, Peekskill, New York. Then you know about the Peekskill riots, when some of my best friends' parents would hide underneath white sheets. And they, maybe their parents took part in the stoning of Paul Robeson and Pete Seeger. Peekskill, New York is a very, very small little town of about 25,000 people, but it's a powerful town. It's got liberals, it's got conservatives, it's got racists. It's got John Birchers. One of the largest John Birch society in the nation was in Peekskill, Yorktown Heights area. Peekskill, New York, well known for people like Mel Gibson went to school there. There was a time when I used to tell that, people would go, "Mel Gibson, yeah," all the women would go, but now they're going, Well, he wasn't the only one. Pee Wee Herman. Whoa. Jackie Gleason, for those old enough. And for those really old enough, if you remember this name, she's been known to sleep there very many times, and her name is Linda Lovelace. I'm trying to wake you up. So it was an interesting town. I had a guidance counselor that did not want, this is full disclosure, who did not think I should go to college. My mother was trying to be convinced by this guidance counselor that I should not go to college. And in a sense, I was internalizing this belief. With the SAT, I scored slightly above President George W. Bush. But our two scores, full disclosure, combined did not make 800 on the math portion of the SAT. You see, I'm going to talk about this and why, because I didn't know this until I began to delve into social science research and neuroscience research and realize that I had some attributional ambiguities, as I called it, that I would bring into the learning situation, where I, as an African American growing up primarily in a mixed crowd, but many of my friends just happened to be white, who thought that African Americans were not sufficiently born with the genes that enable them to succeed. And today we're still fighting that perception. And I'm going to show you and give you answers, I'll give you some exposure to some of the issues that we just need to be aware of. I have never, ever, ever found a racist educator in my life. In fact, anyone that says people are racist, I don't even care if you are missing the issue. The issue is we're all one people. I was just in Kansas City keynoting with about 500 people at the National Council on Educating Black Children, and it was there were, I would say, half white, half people of color. And I said, I just want to bring us together. So I want to bring us together today. I want to talk about some truths. And here's the truth. Every single one of us in this audience is an African American. Every single one of us. Because where did humankind spring from? West Africa. And when millions of years ago we migrated to the north, we lost our color because if we maintained that particular color, we'd end up in rickets. The Genome Project has taught us that there is really nothing separating us. So we're all African American. And that's something to celebrate. You know, everyone talks about European-centric education. You know, we got a European American, European-centric, we got to teach European history. And of course we do. But did you know that the Alps were created by the continent of Africa? Africa has its deep roots in all of us. And it's something to really embrace and to be in awe of and to humble us. It should be something that humbles us, that makes us aware that we have the responsibility, all of us, for being our brother and sister's keepers. And if you hear what I'm going to be doing, it's going to be throughout. My focus is social justice. At times we can't use that term because of some swings in boards of education. They don't want to hear social justice. But that's what we're supposed to be about. And if you would embrace in a religion, what's the common value between or among all religions? Social justice. So you're going to hear some themes. Poverty does not have to be destiny. And diversity is destiny for this nation. Diversity is destiny for this nation. So I had this guidance counselor who didn't believe I could do well in college, and I didn't, and I lived up to that self-fulfilling prophecy that she helped instill in me, and some of my teachers instilled in me. And I got into a community college, and I was so proud. And my mother ran into this guidance counselor in Peekskill, New York, and she asked, how's Eric doing? Because the guidance counselor liked me, but she did not think I should go to college. My mother said, Eric is going to a community college. And invariably in little town of Peekskill, you're walking with a friend, especially in certain areas. And the guidance counselor turned to her friend and said, well, anyone can get into a two-year school. My first semester, I got a 0.80 out of 4. Now, you know what that means, right? You got to understand this aspect of me in terms of what I know is necessary in terms of intelligence. And I stand in front of you as a marker, as an indicator. And I bet you my story resonates with many of you as well. So I found a white biology teacher who believed in me and a black psychology teacher who believed in me. My biology teacher was my wrestling coach, and I began to succeed. And I got out of Dutchess in 5 semesters. Took me an extra semester because I got kicked out of school for partying too much. And I decided to go to a place called Universidad de las Americas in the Ciudad de Mexico. Cuando yo puedo aprender español. Hey, feliz 5 de Mayo. Have a margarita on me today, absolutely. And I got in there, the guidance counselor I'm going to truncate the story. My mother ran into the guidance counselor. She asked, how's Eric doing? She told her proudly that he's learning Spanish. Guess who I was studying with? Ivan Ilyich, Deschooling Society. Now, I know many of you remember this name, Eric Fromm. The Art of, yes. Wow. I sat at his feet in Cuernavaca in the Ciudad de Mexico. It was this wonderful experience, and the guidance counselor asked my mother, where's Eric going to school? And my mother said, Universidad de las Americas in the Ciudad de Mexico, in that accent, because she wanted to learn Spanish, because I was learning Spanish. And the guidance counselor turned to a friend and said, anyone can go to a school outside the country. So this woman is starting to control my life, you see. I left there in about 1.5 years, and I went to City University. Well, I went to another place before that, but I ended up at City University. I graduated. I came across psychology. I liked working with rats. I figured if I could control rats, maybe I can influence some other people that just need to be controlled. Operant conditioning, you know what I'm talking about? Learned hope. Learned hope. I mean, I just want to be the guy my dog, my black lab, Henry, thinks I am. That's all I want to be. And every morning, every evening, there is learned hope in Henry because he's going to get that treat from me or whatever, you know. I love psychology. My grades began to improve. I graduated. I asked my mother, where did that woman go get her master's degree? And she said, Columbia University's Teachers College. I went, Mom, I'm going to that school. She said, Eric, don't do that to yourself. I couldn't get in as a matriculated student. Guess why? I did not do well on test. I walked in one Saturday morning like today, partying, a young man in New York City, and I took the Miller Analogies test. Oh my God. One of the questions was, crewing is to the Charles as boating is to, well, I know with crewing, that must mean crew cut. Charles is a friend of mine. I was told I had the worst MAT score ever in the history of Teachers College, Columbia University. Now, do you think that made me feel good? It made me feel horrible. I felt like crying. So I couldn't get in as a matriculated student, but an Italian-American professor, Frizziani, had interest in me. And he said, Eric, blacks just don't do well on tests. See, the theory was not there yet. Claude Steele, and if you haven't read this book, please run to this book. Run to this book, Whistling Vivaldi, Claude Steele, where he talks about stereotype threats that affect the performance of students. You can't talk about equity without talking about education. You can't talk about diversity without talking about education. You can't talk about social change and social justice without talking about education. The point of this, I got in as a non-matriculated student, and I got my first master's, and I got my second master's, and I asked, Mom, did this woman ever get a doctorate? And she said, no. I said, well, I am. And this is the point where my mother really put the foot on the brake. Well, Eric, you're going to be the first. And my mother was an educator. My father worked the midnight shift in the post office, drinking 17 cups of coffee to keep himself up, and then came back and helped my mother in the nursery school that she created in our home. She didn't get a doctorate, but I did. Not only did I do that, I got hired as a faculty person at Columbia Teachers College. I wrote more articles than many of the professors that taught me. And I could not wait till my mother ran into this guidance counselor. And she did. She did. And guess what she said? I always knew Eric had it in him. Listen, if we're going to get to equity, we have to be aware of the two camps that exist in this society. And this is where I'm starting to get into the neuroscience part of my speech. I am an avid reader of neuroscience. I think, and what we're doing in school systems where we work, is teaching the teachers to understand how the brain works, and then teaching the teachers themselves and the administrators and the kids how the brain works. So there is a fight for values. You know, you can't, I wish, you know, I could not do it. I could not go to, because I had some papers that I had to write last night. So I didn't get to hear Cheryl. And I wish I had an opportunity, Bruce, to hear her, because I heard she came at whoever was there charging hard. And we need that. But there's a fight for values in America. There's the liberal camp. There's a conservative camp. I don't know where you put the libertarians. They're somewhere more on the right. But, you know, some of my best friends are libertarian, full disclosure. For liberals, someone got that. For liberals, morality is largely a matter of three values: caring for the weak, fairness, and liberty. And conservatives share these three concerns and values as well, but think of fairness as a form of social Darwinism. Example, people control their own destinies. Pick yourself up from your own bootstraps. I did it, so why can't you? I'm an Italian American. My parents immigrated to this country. Why can't the blacks do the same? Or Latinos do the same? People control their destinies, and they view liberty more as loyalty. And they have this respect for authority and the sanctity of home and their lives. I don't think liberals have anything against that. In fact, if you put that on a, bar graph, I think they would line up fairly equally, wouldn't you? I mean, the only difference is, and this is where I differ, because of my work in Harlem, and my work in LA, and my work in Chicago, and my work in Detroit, my work in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, my work in Robbinsdale, our work in Wayzata, our work in San Francisco, our work in Kansas City, Missouri, has taught me that given the fact that some homes have one bread earner, and that happens to be a mother in a challenged family in terms of financial circumstances, and that mother is one of my heroes, holds 2 or 3 jobs for the most part. They do not have time to tutor their kids. They don't have time to enrich their lives of kids. They don't have the money to hire tutors, not only to help them with courses, but to write their papers to get into college. Thank you very much. Those kids are less at risk. And the term that I came up with, which is captured in one of my colleagues' great new book, The Pedagogy of Confidence by Yvette Jackson, a term I came up with after working in Harlem, and Fort Greene in Brooklyn, when I went into the homes as a teacher, and I got to meet the parents. And when it was Latino home in East Harlem, I had to drink that big bowl of coffee that was sweetened with sugar, but I drank it with a smile. I hate sugar in my coffee. In fact, I really don't like coffee that much. It's only on opportunities like this that I have a cup of coffee to wake myself up. I learned in those homes, even when a parent was a drug addict, and I had many parents who were drug addicts, during their lucid moments, they cared as much about their kids' success as the parents in Wayzata or Greenwich. But they had internalized this perception of themselves that was engendered in this society. You cannot talk about children who come from financially challenged homes as at risk or lacking the intelligence of the other children who come from wealthier communities. You just can't do that. Those kids I have called are school dependent. They are school dependent. They are dependent on the school for learning. They come with this 30 million word gap. You know about that. But guess what? This is where I differ, because I worked in those communities. I work in those communities. It's not a 30 million word gap. The gap is an academic word gap. The language of the educated families. Because let me tell you, these kids have a rich cultural experience that is imbued with feelings and a sense of family and a sense of hope. We have to tap into that culture. We have to recognize kids for the genius and the unique destiny that exists with all of them. I am getting charged up really quickly. I just, keep talking, huh? Amen, my brothers and sisters. It wasn't until, later in life that I realized my great-grandfather, who was a full Scot, discriminated because he married an African American, was also a Baptist preacher. I didn't know. But great-granddaddy's coming out of me. I'm feeling my roots. I know who I am. I praise who I need to praise. I feel the amen coming up in me. Look, we're brought together by many different things. Most of the conflict basically comes from in terms of statistical side of this, what you see is all there is mentality. You see something and you jump to this conclusion. You jump to this conclusion about someone. You stereotype them. You blink, as Malcolm Gladwell talks about. You make an assumption about someone. It's like that fool that he is. Yes, sir, Bruce, this man is a fool. He's a very bright man. He's not as brilliant as he thinks he is, and I've met him. But he's a very bright man. And he used to be president of Harvard University. And he said the following: women are just not endowed with the ability to do math and science. What an idiot. Idiot. I could take any one of you in this room and bring a stereotype threat to you before you take a test. And I know, because I've done these things, and Claude Steele has found this with Josh Aronson in the research. I know just by engendering that stereotype, I can do it with white boys, I can do it with black boys. Just by engendering that stereotype, which comes up, your score will drop 50%. It's a threat of a stereotype. Claude Steele, then provost of Columbia University, I love this guy, Whistling Vivaldi. Whistling Vivaldi. Read that book. It will be a game changer for many of you. Whistling Vivaldi. You know Vivaldi? Based upon, it opened up with, Brent Staples, the writer for the New York Times, African American. He went to University of Chicago. When he would get out late, it would be dark. And he's walking black. And white couples would see him and cross to the corner, and it made him feel horrible. So he came up with this device. He decided to whistle Vivaldi because he felt that anyone hearing Vivaldi cannot be a threat, and it worked. Claude, at Stanford University with African Americans who scored A's and B's on his math tests, just by asking his African American students to list their race, caused the students to drop 50% from a B to a D, from an A to a C. Primarily, why? Because the threat of the stereotype that was being using is blacks just aren't smart enough. And where has that come from? I'll tell you where it's come from. Because I've studied this. I followed the money. Yes, indeed, I have followed the money. It goes back to William Shockley. William Shockley, the inventor of the transistor. He didn't think blacks could do it. So what did he do? Sunk millions of dollars in trying to convince blacks that they can do it. And he got other foundations to join him, like the Bradley Foundation, the Smith-Richardson Foundation, the Olin Foundation, the Walton Foundation. He got them, and it led to them, and they created this idea for this white paper. And it materialized in the book that you probably know called The Bell Curve. Follow the Money, Mark Dowie, American Foundations. Read it. It shows you what has caused this pernicious thing to happen in our society. Brian, you didn't expect this, did you? Didn't expect this. Sunk millions and millions and millions of dollars. Think of the money that's being spent on trying to defeat President Obama. And what teachers could use with that money, my God, it's a crime. What's wrong with our society? Who's the people that got behind, God bless them, Newt Gingrich? They gave him millions. How much? 20, 30 million? Do you know what could be done with $30 million in schools? So these conservative foundations using the bell curve, and on page 526 it says the following. They say it frivolously, Charles Murray and the late Richard Herrnstein. 526, page 526, check it out. Check it out, because I was directed to it by one of my the late great Asa Hilliard. Page 526, it says, what we need to do in America is put poor people of color on lavish type reservations while America goes about doing its work. Now he said, I don't really mean that. We can't do that. Then in 2008, the fool, Charles Murray that he is, who has the Bradley Endowed Chair in the American Enterprise Institute, the conservative institute think tank in D.C., they always were on the air. Now, this is not political. Please don't take this as political. Now, really, don't take this as political because, you know, some of my best friends are, well, some people I know are conservatives as well. In his book, 2008, Charles Murray writes, only 10 to 15, now this is everybody, by the way. Bruce, this is bad. He says only 10 to 15% of Americans are sufficiently intelligent to graduate from a liberal university. Whew. Well, that leaves most of you out, and me. The damage in that kind of statement. You just don't go to college to get A's and B's. You go to college to learn how to think. You go to college to learn how to act. You go to college to learn how to be. You go to college to learn to become an advocate for whatever purposes you're advocating for. So intelligence is not just what you know or how much you know, but you're taught intelligence is not just what you know, but what you do when you don't know what to do. Best definition of intelligence I ever heard, Jerome Bruner. It's not everything that you memorize, though that's part of it, but what you do when you don't know what to do. I'm watching my watch because I want to make sure I leave enough time for, and I'm not even into the meat of my presentation yet. So bear with me. Now here's something funny. This is a study by Ryota Kanai of the University College of London. People who identified themselves as liberals generally had a larger anterior cingulate cortex. I love neuroscience. A comma-shaped region near the front of the brain that is involved in decision-making. By contrast, those who identified themselves as conservatives had larger amygdalas. Now I'm going to explain to you, larger amygdalas. That's the almond-shaped structure that are linked with emotional learning and the processing of fear. Fear. The amygdala is commonly associated with emotional arousal and is active when subject choices conform to their frame of reference, their exposure. That's important. The amygdala is activated very often when the individual conforms to the belief systems that are inherent in the group that you have been brought up in. The anterior cingulate cortex has a lot to do with self-control. We have found from our research and the literature that the most important thing to teach kids, especially in high school, is self-control. In fact, self-control has been found to be a higher factor in terms of achievement than IQ. It's that learned, delayed gratification. It's hard in this society, given reality TV, lotteries. We had this need. It's like Plato said. What did he say? Remember? This is great. I loved it because I really got it for me. Plato said that size is to space as time is to value. Size is to space as time is to value. When it's in front of you, it's more valued. When it's your experience, it's more valued. When it's your culture, it's more valued. If you're raised in a conservative family, it's more valued, those conservative values. But there are ways of getting at that. Remember the rats? I mean this. That was just in jest. Because People can have their beliefs and it's okay. But I want them to understand where these beliefs are residing in and why they are there. We have something throughout our brain called mirror neurons. Mirror neurons. Infants can learn racism as young as 5 months old if the parents are demonstrating that. Let me show you something. And the reverse is also true. Let me show you something. I'm jumping a little, but this is what I want to do.
Young, light skin being more attractive than dark skin.
We're not smart. We're this way, we're that way. And a lot of times we have to prove ourselves as not being true.
At a young age, I already knew the standards for a girl like me. As I become older, they become more obvious.
You have to have permed hair, relaxed hair, straight hair or like blonde hair, long waves or something. And if it's natural, that's good hair. Like bad hair is hair you have to relax because it's kinky. Like it's not like a pill and a half, like natural hairstyles. Or like if they are natural, they have to be like the curly head, like black girl, or something that looks mixed or something. I remember when I first started wearing my hair natural, at first my mom was okay with it, and she thought it looked nice. And then after like the second day, she was like, oh, stop that. She was like, you're starting to look African. I was like, well, I am African, and that really pissed me off.
There are standards that are imposed upon us, like, you're prettier if you're light skinned.
I knew people in the past that wanted to be light skinned, not for any particular reason, because they love themselves. I mean, they love themselves except for, the color of their skin.
Hey, my siblings are all lighter than me, and my mom, she's dark skinned, but she's lighter than me. So I noticed, and I was like, hey, how come I'm the darkest, and everybody else is so light, and I don't know. Since I was younger, I also considered being lighter as a form of beauty, or beautiful, more beautiful than being dark skinned. So I used to think of myself as being ugly because I was dark skinned.
I knew people who actually went out there and got bleaching cream and everything. They actually laid in the tub, poured capfuls of bleach into it just so they could see if their skin would get lighter. But yeah, my aunt that lives in Honduras, she basically started using skin bleaching cream when she was about 25. And she started her oldest daughter on it when she was about 11, and then she had an even younger daughter that was about 6 when she started using the skin bleaching cream on her.
I've seen people say that I would never marry a dark-skinned man because I don't want that in my gene pool.
On the other hand, some girls have their issues too. We would call high conceited house nigga. I feel like both sides have their issues.
I guess I sort of felt like there was not any attention towards me because of maybe my skin color or because my hair was kinky or specifically that. Or even when I was younger, say there was I don't know, a doll. I used to have a lot of dolls, but most of them were just white dolls with long straight hair, and then I would comb, and I was like, oh, I wish I was just like this Barbie doll. In Brown versus Board of Education, the famous case that desegregated schools in the 1950s, Dr. Kenneth Clark conducted a doll test with black children. He asked them to choose between a black doll or a white doll. In most instances, the majority of the children preferred the white doll. I decided to reconduct this test as Dr. Clark did to see how we've progressed since then. Can you show me the doll that you like best or that you like to play with?
to this country, and they were pretty much ripped out of their culture.
Enough said, right? These kids are picking this up somewhere. Mirror neurons have a role in that, but society has a role in that as well, in terms of what is created. And we as a nation have got to have the serious, as Glenn Singleton talks about, the courageous conversations that are necessary. Not to label any of us as racist, because none of us are, but to understand that conversation is needed, primarily because this was produced in 2006. It's been replicated in 2011 and 2012 by CNN. Anderson Cooper also did the same study. An interesting factoid, just to show you, I wrote a piece for the New York Times that was published on desegregation and the Brown versus Board of Education court decision. And the person that responded to it was Nate Hentoff. Anyone know Nate Hentoff? Wonderful jazz writer for the Village Voice, but also an avid libertarian and also an avid integrationist. And he told me, because I was telling him about this Dahl study, and he told me that right before he died, Kenneth Clark, who I got to know while at graduate school, I asked him to come in and speak to some students when I was a graduate student, and he did. And Clark told Nate Hentoff that his life was a failure because of Milliken versus Bradley, the 1974 Supreme Court case that struck down integration. Now that really saddened me. I just heard about this like a couple weeks ago. I think what is really important here in terms of showing you a girl like me is to make it clear that we have challenges in this society. We have challenges. I don't have to talk about Trayvon Martin. We know that race played a role with that, don't we? Then does anyone think? You know, I would suggest that Zimmerman is not a racist, but he lives in fear. And he stereotypes individuals based upon their race as not being good, as the little kids were saying. I'm black, so the doll that is bad is black. Now, he may be a racist. I don't know. I'm not going to cast aspersions on anybody until found guilty. I don't know if we'll ever find that out. But the act itself is racist because he jumped to conclusions about an individual who had a hood over his head running through a neighborhood. My son looks like Trayvon Martin. Justin, 17-year-old, looks just like Trayvon Martin. Skinny, tall, beautiful brown skin. And it just made me cry when I saw what happened. The data is clear. Here's what I want to spend time on, though. Blacks make up 12.6% of the country's population, but accounted for 70% of the racial hate crimes. Black men make up more than 40% of the nation's prison population, and Michelle Alexander in her great book, The New Jim Crow, great book. I see you shaking your head, my man. Great book. I met her at the Alex Haley farm with Marian Wright Edelman, where she was speaking, where I was invited. Michelle claims that more black men are incarcerated and in criminal justice systems now than were enslaved in 1850. It's horrible. Do you realize, and I know that you probably do, that there are some state governments that decide to build prisons based upon how well students do on a 3rd or 4th grade reading test? Black children are 17% of the student population in education, but account for 33% of students in special ed. I'm a special educator. I know how important special ed, that was my first degree, is. But when it becomes a dead end for kids, then we have a problem. 1 in 3 youths in prison have previously received special education services. It does not have to be a dead end for kids. It does not have to be that way. Special education is really wonderful housing for quote-unquote talented and gifted kids. Why can't we shift the paradigm to perceive all kids as gifted kids, all kids with a unique potential? Why do we go for the weaknesses of the kids rather than the strengths of the kids? Why do we dismiss certain cultural experiences of the students and accept the extant theories of that European culture is what we need to push? 1/2 of black and brown students are at risk of failure in the nation. Now this goes to the stereotype threat. Listen carefully to this. I got this from Whistling Vivaldi, Claude Steele's book. The national college dropout rate for black students is 20 to 25% higher than for white students, even when blacks were just as well prepared for college, had no socioeconomic disadvantage, they come from wealthier families, and managed to get excellent SAT scores. Those black students who did finish college, why is their grade point average consistently lower than white students? It's because of the stereotype threat. John Ogbu's research that he did in Shaker Heights, the great research that he did. More of us need to remember John Ogbu and what he was fighting for and what he believed. The threat of stereotypes is all around us. And what we need to do is to make sure that we go to the source and address that. I want to spend the rest of my time talking about what can be done. What can we do? Because I really want to leave sufficient time for conversation. I don't want America to become a hereditary plutocracy under the trappings of liberal democracy, as we quickly are becoming. Citizens United scares the hell out of me. Just scares the hell out of me. And I'll never forget one of the Supreme Court justices, when President Obama was giving his State of the Nation, when you could read his mouth. Was that the Chief Justice that did that? I don't, no? It was somebody else. Who was it? It was one of them. What can we do? We need to change beliefs. We need to change the definition of intelligence. We need to uncover the strengths of individuals. One of my greatest heroes was Reuben Feuerstein. Taught my colleague Yvette Jackson a lot. In his research, he worked with kids who were challenged by Down syndrome. One had this reported IQ of 72. After working with Reuben for 3 years, the child is now a clinical psychologist with a PhD. Thank you very much. Meaning the right kind of interventions can mediate intelligence. The brain is sufficiently plastic for growth to occur. And about a decade ago, the medical profession was profoundly shocked by the fact that the brain can regenerate cells, in particular at the hippocampus, which is on both sides, right above the ear. And the hippocampus is an important aspect of our brain because it controls the language and thought of the individual. It is a traffic cop, the hippocampus. Now this is exciting. The brain can regenerate cells, guys. So as a baby boomer, I'm so happy because of the things that I used to do that kill brain cells. I know I still have hope. And drinking that cup of coffee, there's still hope. And that wine, I'm a wino. I love wine and I love margaritas. There's hope. You know why? You know how many brain cells we have? 100 billion. And of that 100 billion, we have the potential of 1 trillion neural pathway connections. 1 trillion. Woo. I love to access that. And I learned this, and Reuben knew this because he worked with a kid who had his entire left hemisphere removed to control epilepsy. And after working with Reuben Feuerstein, a cognitive psychologist, 90 years old in Israel, Alex, who I also work with, developed bilaterality in the right remaining hemisphere. Now that's powerful. Now I want to argue, and I love Brother Kanjufu. But, when he says that I want to teach to the right brain of the African-American boy, no. The right brain basically sees the forest through the trees, the big picture. The left brain takes all of these vocabulary words and our experiences that we're learning and stores them in jumbled ways. It is the right brain that makes sense. And when it gets into the prefrontal cortex, that's where we store it, and that's where our working memory is. We take in, every single one of us takes in 10 million data sets every single minute. 10 million. So it's in there, guys. We just have to find a way of activating it and getting to it. Of that 10 million in a minute, we can only pull up 40 of those data sets. 40, Mary. And so we need pedagogy that can enable us to pull that up, whether it's thinking maps that we push, whether it's understanding culturally responsive teaching, whether it's understanding how kids learn and dealing with those strengths that kids have so that they can bridge that gap between what they know and what they do not know. I want to teach to both hemispheres. I want to enable kids to understand vocabulary not as a word, just as a word to memorize, but as a concept. I want to deepen their inductive experience, how it works from the specific up to the general, so that deductively they get the sense of the general and are able to deal with the specific. I want to teach the Common Core, I'm not calling it Common Core standards, the Common Core principles that exist in content area. And I want to teach a kid to become a good thinker. I want to teach that kid how to get into the head of the teacher. How to get into the head of the teacher. And then when that kid is faced with tests, I want to affirm that child before he takes or she takes a test, just by using words like success and examples of success, can significantly improve their ability to get over that stereotype threat. I want to change their belief. I want to change their belief, because when you change their belief, then the kids become hopeful. And when the kids become hopeful, the brain is activated. And something happens that's a miracle. I want you to stand up, please. Just stand up. I need you to find a partner. And if you don't have a partner, wait till someone does this. Peer up. I need you to get near each other. I want you to reach over and give that person a huge hug. Hug it. All right, I want you to do it again. Mary, you got to find somebody. I want you to do it again. Number 3. I want you to do it again. Number 4. We got a ways to go. You got to find somebody. I want you to do it again. 5. Again. Do it again, please. I want you to do it again. Number 6. And again, number 7. This is it. This is it. And again, number 8, and really hold it. This is, you can sit down. This is great. Now, do you feel something? I mean, do you feel it? It's when I press the Western Wall in Jerusalem. I didn't expect to feel anything, but I felt something. And it lifted me up. And it gave me hope. That's all I'm going to say. Listen, I'm a Unitarian. I believe in all religions. What you're doing and what you just did is you activated something that comes from the hypothalamus. So women, that's where that biological clock is housed. And it's a neurotransmitter. We have 100 neurotransmitters in our brain. And it's called oxytocins. Oxytocins are the molecule that controls morality. When you activate oxytocins, you're activating the dopamine neural pathways, the reward system within the brain. You're building relationship. When you have relationships, when teachers have relationships, they're accessing oxytocins, dopamine. When you have relationships, another neurotransmitter is serotonin, which controls self-control. So you got this happening in the amygdala, where oxytocin is produced, in the hypothalamus, where oxytocins are produced. So when touching, or praying, or hugging, and I'm in the Midwest, I'm not going to say the other one, but you let your imaginations run wild. It happens only a couple times for us. It's a wonderful experience. That produced, see, I'm showing some intellectual discipline, Mary. Especially since I'm in the Midwest. If I was in the East Coast or the West Coast, I'd be kicking it out there. But it's even better by doing it this way, Bruce. So when you do that, you're activating hope in the brain. Hope. Now there is an authentic biology to hope. This is critical. Critical. Jerome Groopman, in a wonderful book, you should read it, especially since half of us are going to be struggling with cancer at some point in our lives. And all of us, I am certain, know of somebody who has cancer in our lives. Jerome Groopman, Groopman, The Anatomy of Hope, has taught us this is all about equity. Through knowledge comes equity. Through learning comes equity. This is all about diverse thinking, divergent thinking, convergent thinking. This is about a community of learners. Jerome Groopman has proven to us that when he was able to take his patients at Harvard's medical school and teach them to be hopeful with dealing with their cancer and living with their cancer, he found a higher success rate for those who became hopeful versus those who were cynical about the disease. Because there is an authentic biology. When the brain becomes hopeful, the brain emits something called endorphins and enkephalins, which have analgesic properties that actually can destroy the cancer's wall so that the body, the white blood cells, can attack it and defeat it. Optimism versus pessimism. I'm not in Missouri. Skepticism is fine. But it really is remaining optimistic about our ability to change people. So belief animates hope. Hope becomes learned by the individual. That is where the individual begins to get a sense that they're not working for the damn grade. They're working to learn how to learn. They're working to become successful. And I can show you many children, without a doubt, in calculus classes, at Eden Prairie High School, Con knows this, I've talked about Con, who have developed something called that Carol Dweck calls fixed mindsets, where they just work for that A. That's the goal. And they're not getting underneath because achievement is less important than effort. The brain, when you think about those potential 1 trillion neurosynaptic connections that can happen out of the 100 billion neural cells that are in our brains, the brain can access these things and do it correctly if we understand how to teach the child to become or develop a growth mindset. Because effort is more important than achievement. Malcolm Gladwell, and it's not Gladwell's research, but it's a great book, where he talks about, outliers. Great book. He cites Anders Ericsson's research that found out to be an expert, you have to spend 10,000 guided hours where you're practicing that skill before that skill becomes a knowledge and internalized. To become an expert, 10,000 hours. It holds up. Michael Jordan, well, my golfing buddy, he's got a little ways to go because he got in front of himself. He got into self-love. He needs to get out of that. Because he has a fixed mindset, you see, because he's playing golf to succeed as a star rather than the love of the game that he used to bring. He's developed a fixed mindset because he's fighting that image, that stereotype that he engendered, that he allowed to control his life. Self-control is more important than IQ. God knows we got all the impulses in the world, guys, right? But when you wear, and I have a ring, I just can't wear it because gold now breaks up my, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's being married for 20 years. I have no idea. Don't ever tell my wife I said that. Oh, damn, this is on tape. Carol, excuse me, sweetie pie. The point that I'm trying to say is, if we are going to deepen effort and teach the kids that what is really more important than the what is more important than the gray matter is the white matter, Bruce. It's called myelin. Myelin covers the neuron, makes the connections. The stronger the white matter gets, the faster the signal is. Effort strengthens the myelin. If you look at dementia, it's the unthreading of the myelin that causes the problem for the individual. So we need to strengthen that. And we can strengthen that with directed, coached effort. Mediated effort, as my colleague Yvette Jackson talks about in her wonderful book, Pedagogy of Confidence. We need those pedagogies. Mozart was not born a genius. He was born with the capacity. But because his father was steeped in music pedagogy, he enabled his son to succeed. And man, did that guy practice. I love that movie. What was it called? Amadeus. Effort. Effort over achievement. Character more than talent. I want to develop the character that forces an individual. This is my paradigm. Belief, hope. Now I'm at determination. The character that the individual needs to do. And how do you do that? By enabling that person to feel success, guided through a coach, guided in a renewed belief, that that child can succeed. And if a child with Reuven, with an IQ of 72 reported, can become a clinical psychologist, and that child lives with Down syndrome, how come we cannot teach all kids how to learn? We have to change our beliefs, our expectations. We have to check them at the door. When we walk in, the job is not to make fun of a kid. Like my daughter, 16-year-old Haley, she came back in tears welling up. She said, I fall apart in tests. I said, can I explain this to you? No, Daddy, I don't want to hear one of your lectures. You just can't reach your own kids. But I'm getting her. I'm tricking her. I'm figuring out a way to get Haley. I'm figuring it out. But when Haley cries when the teacher made fun of her because of an answer in Spanish, ridiculed her, not knowing that Haley, my beloved daughter, has an auditory processing challenge, it makes me kind of mad. And you know what I did, right? I marched into that school. I did not go see the teacher. I went to see the assistant principal. And I said, Tina, we got a problem. This needs to be addressed. Tina, there's some stereotypes that need to be addressed in this school. Determination, and that's what I'm working on with Haley. Helping kids to avoid those social circumstances which give rise, and here's another important point, you can put kids in a stereotyped threat that the adrenal glands will cause something to produce something called cortisols, C-O-R-T-I-S-O-L-S, cortisols. When the individual is stressed, cortisol floods the body and impacts learning and memory, in particular memory. Now, what is creativity? Creativity is nothing more than associated memories applied exceptionally well to a new situation. Did you hear what I just said? Remember, the brain takes in 10 million data sets per minute. Associated memories, it's all in there, guys. The poet who struggles and puts effort into something and looks at that blank paper and nothing is coming out. When that person is in fear, cortisols come about. And they've done study with kids who are challenged in financial circumstances. And they found, and my colleague talks about, that the child from a financially challenged home often has lesions on the head. Cortisol is being produced. The adrenals are not being shut off by the hopeful portions of the brain. Here's what's key. I watched my watch. I got to move faster. But this is key. Now here's an ironic thing. Not only is cortisol produced for those kids from financially challenged circumstances, it's also produced for the wealthy individuals who are struggling to keep what is theirs and not allowing anyone else to get what they have because they're in fear. You go back, and there's studies that you go back and you check out wealthy communities and wealthy homes, and you find that stress is a killer in those families as well. So what I've been attempting to do is talk to you about a new paradigm. Talk to you about creativity. As Einstein said, it's the residue of time wasted, but it is based upon effort. It is necessary for competence to emerge so that social demography does not have to be destiny. Diversity is destiny in our country. But poverty does not have to be destiny. If we as educators learn the kinds of interventions that enable us to help our children succeed. Think about, and this is in conclusion, think about what enables a system, an organization, a business to succeed. It is maximizing group creativity in an atmosphere which encourages learning from our mistakes, where teamwork and the experience of another culture endows the individual with a valuable open-mindedness. I loved writing this the other day. And where pluralism is always practical. It is the mingling, quote, the mingling of diversity with people of different social distances which allows knowledge spillover to occur, end quote. You go into the environments, you see homogeny at work, you can be sure that those environments are not as creative and do not have the same potential as diverse environments. The more diverse an environment, the more successful an organization becomes, and that's why so many businesses, though they may have given up on American students, they're bringing in people from other countries to add to the diversity. The more diverse, the more successful. So I would say to the Wyzetta parent, and I can't even show you the data because I don't have time. Or I'd say to the Eden Prairie, and I was lifted up today, Eric, when you told me that my hero, Melissa Cruel, was fired because she pushed for restructuring of Forest Hills Elementary School so that she would be able to get more integrated schools throughout her community. The Board of Education has turned on a dime, God bless them, and decided that she was right. Is that correct?
Yeah, some people are given the facts, forced to vote different than they would have.
Thank you. The mingling, I love this quote, the mingling of diversity with people of different social distances which allows knowledge spillover. Let's avoid the insularity. This beautiful Saturday morning, which is rainy, should keep us inside. Let's find that common ground, folks, and a common purpose, where together we can scream at the top of our lungs, open sesame to the Elysian fields where the heroes of our species dwell. Their color is not important. Their wealth is not important. I'm feeling a rush of oxytocin as I look out over you guys. Celebrate yourselves. Celebrate the possibility. Do not give up on hope. Thank you very, very much for your attention. Thank you. Thank you.
I would like to present you with a gift from the conference here, and thank you so much for coming to talk to us. And I think we have time for 2 questions. We have time for a question.
I'm sorry, guys. I got so caught up. You're a great audience. I really deeply appreciated it. Up in the back.
Oh, yes. I will come to you.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Thank you for bringing all that up. In 1993, in the city of Minneapolis, we had a home visiting initiative, grassroots efforts. And I was a home visitor. Started out as a parent support worker, going into the homes to help families and to help our city understand why our children were failing by 3rd grade. An initiative by our superintendent, Richard Green.
Oh, Richard.
And the mayor, Don Frazier. Those efforts fell apart because everyone pulled their funding in 2005. And the organization had to become an entity for profit or a nonprofit, but it had to function differently. And so all the work that we had done fell away. But at the same time, we seen the work move into research. And the reports that we had for why our families were failing were because of the social inequalities, the lack of access, poor prenatal care. And so from there, I've seen our medical industry go give women that much information to this much information, but not talk to them about the information in there. And so I became a doula. And so I see that then there's a push to push me out of the hospital when I'm there to assist the woman just to have a successful birth.
Right.
Not to change her mind about how she's going to birth, but that she has a successful one. Then I go into early childhood 7 years later, and it's just getting there. And then the federal government has to come to the state and say, wait a minute, your early childhood and K through 12 programs aren't merged. This is not, it should be a seamless system as far as I'm concerned, and I'm glad that the federal government said to our state, you've got to re-merge that. But I've got children in the public education system, and in my youngest girl's school, they want to take the Mexican children and Latino children and put them into a 70% split throughout the day so that we can enrich the learning for the bilingual students, for the Spanish.
Do you agree with that, or do you agree with that?
And so I disagree because
Okay.
I'm a cultural trainer. And what I see that the state developed a cultural training. Everyone all over the state participated in developing a cultural training that sat on the book as a law, but didn't get the push because we didn't want to force teachers to learn
Right.
about culture. And then
Right.
here we are. And so what I said to the school, before you make a change like that, you first have to prepare your teachers.
Absolutely.
And so I'm fighting. I know then that as I sit here, I'm fighting the right fight.
Right.
That we don't do this massively, because I'm not preventing students from learning. My grandmother was Mexican, as I come to learn at the age of 30-something. And I don't know the language, so there's no way I'm going to prevent them from learning
Right.
what they need to learn.
Can I jump
Yeah.
in? Can I jump in? You're right. Structure needs to be supported that enables these movements to take hold. When it's done in a purposeful way, and it's done in a way that celebrates the passion of people such as you. And it's explained, and it's done in a constructive manner that's integrated with some of the pedagogical changes that I know are necessary in terms of the skills that teachers need. We have gotten, in Eden Prairie, we got 2 standard deviations of improvement across the board, unheard of. That basically means that kids who are low achieving are now achieving at the rate, 2 standard deviations at the rate of the wealthier kids. The wealthier 14 to 16% of the kids who are succeeding. So this is what the capacity of these kids of color have in Eden Prairie and San Francisco and all over the nation. What you're talking about is that we need to address not only the structural changes, as well as the philosophical changes, as well as the instructional changes that are necessary. Here's a point. There are 3.2 million educators in America. What is more strategic? Changing a structure or endowing those teachers with the skills that really meet the needs of all kids? Nothing against charters. God bless them for those that are working. But those that are not working, they should be gone. But they're not, and that's a problem. But however, be strategic. And what you're asking us to do is be strategic. It's not integration for integration's sake. It is integration based upon a need that we know is important, that needs to be carefully structured so that those resource systems that you are a part of are not diminished, but endowed. So I thank you for your comment.
Can you hear me?